I saw Guy Ritchie's The Covenant last week, so here are my thoughts and review on this movie. As always, there will be spoilers in this video, so if you don't want spoilers, go ahead and head over to my shorts or my TikTok and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shop.eazyapparel.com, and let's talk about Guy Ritchie's The Covenant. Now, I am a big fan of war movies, but it's safe to say that I really enjoyed this movie. It had a lot of action and a lot more emotion than I thought, and it built up the two main characters pretty well in my opinion. The combat scenes were awesome, and honestly, they were probably my favorite part of the entire movie, but I'll touch on that later when I get into the good of this movie. Essentially, this movie follows the character of Sergeant John Kinley, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and when his squad is attacked, John is saved by his interpreter Ahmed. But once John's back at home and figures out Ahmed is still in trouble in Afghanistan, he decides to go back to get both Ahmed and his family to safety. Alright, let's get into the good. Now, as I mentioned before, my favorite part of this movie was the action and the combat scenes because they were just awesome. Each of these sequences felt real and felt like I was in it with them as they were battling through the Taliban. And honestly, I don't know how they did this or how they made me feel this way, but each of these scenes had their own individual stakes, which I thought added a lot of suspense to this movie. And when John's team died right there in the beginning, each of those deaths somehow hit hard, which is weird because you barely knew those characters to begin with. But my favorite action sequence in this whole movie is when John and Ahmed were going through the mountains fighting off the Taliban. There was a little bit of stealth in this scene right before they had to go, guns a-blazing. But this scene, I mean, really, like I said before, put you in their shoes and made you feel like you were right there with them running through these mountains. And the scene was super intense. They ended up having to hide in this little, I don't know, like cavern or something like that to get the Taliban off of them, and then they found that little house. But that whole sequence I thought was just awesome. It was intense. It had me sitting on the edge of my seat, and heck, I enjoyed every part of that scene right there. The next good thing about this movie were the main characters, both John Kinley and Ahmed, and these were played by, as I said before, Jake Gyllenhaal and Dar Salim. And the first thing I noticed between these two is that their chemistry was great, and their characters were built up pretty well for the most part. Ahmed, who was played by Dar Salim, had pretty good depth to his character. We learned a little bit about his past with the Taliban and that really his main goal was just to get his family out of Afghanistan. This made you care about him even more, and it raised the stakes when we figured out that he was still in Afghanistan once John was back at home and he had to go back and get him. Jake Gyllenhaal was also great. We got more depth from his character towards like the middle/end of the movie, which I do have some mixed feelings about in that middle part, but I'll get to that in a second. But overall, Jake Gyllenhaal had a strong performance. He invoked a lot of emotion when we saw his character kind of go through that survivor's guilt of wondering why he was the one who made it back from Afghanistan and it wasn't Ahmed, and this essentially led him to making that decision, along with a little bit of a push from his wife to go back and help Ahmed and his family get out of Afghanistan. And the final thing I thought this movie did a really good job at was building the stakes, not just for the third act, but honestly throughout every scene in this movie. As I said before, each of these action scenes had their own stakes. And honestly, I don't know the best way to explain that, but when I was watching this movie, every decision meant something when they were in combat. Whether it's like, hey, stay quiet here so we don't get caught, or hey, we're gonna have to shoot our way out of this, let's fight back. But each of those decisions you really felt, if that makes sense. Now for the so-so, and I really only have one thing here, and that is this movie's pacing. This movie got off to a hot start, but when it came to the part where Ahmed had to carry John back to base, this movie really slowed down for me because this sequence was just a little too long. Now, I did think this sequence was good overall, and this may be something they did on purpose to really make you feel how long that journey was that Ahmed had to take, and I guess it did also add to his character, but I do think we could have got the same out of it even if it was cut down by just a little bit. And if you combine that with the time we spent at home with John, it really slows down this movie just to ramp back up just like it was in the beginning of the movie once we got to that third act. And once again, I do think both of these sequences were needed, but I also think we would have gotten the same effect if it was a little bit shorter too. And finally, let's get into the bad. Now this kind of goes along with the pacing of the movie, but when we were in that sequence when John was back at home and he was trying to get Ahmed out of Afghanistan, this whole sequence just kind of felt out of place for me in a way. As I said before, Jake Gyllenhaal was fine in this, but during this part of the movie, we kind of had like a tone change from a war movie to more of a drama, and that just really didn't fit this movie in my opinion. I mean, at times during this short 10 minutes minutes of the movie, I felt like I was watching a completely different film. And lastly, and I guess this isn't necessarily something bad with the movie, but this is one of those movies that if you've seen the trailer, then you've seen about 75% of this movie. And that's because it does take a while to finally get to the part where John decides to go back for Ahmed, so at times you do feel like you're just kind of waiting around for that to happen. But that's just me being nitpicky. At the end of the day, Guy Ritchie's The Covenant is a good, entertaining war film with great action and solid emotion from the main characters. And if you love war movies, then you'll definitely enjoy watching this one. But those are my thoughts on Guy Ritchie's The Covenant. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shop, easyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.